I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and it feels like Asian Americans, maybe conservative Asian Americans, are very easy targets nowadays, whether it be in comics or just entertainment in general, maybe just in media. Here with me to talk about this is someone that's kind of dealt with this in his time in comics and in advertising, things like that, is my good friend Tim Lim. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on again, Wes, to talk about this, I guess, kind of political topic.
It's kind of weird, everyone seems to be on, eggshells right now. You don't want to present yourself or go after certain minority categories, because it will make yourself look bad. It opens yourself up to a lot of negative publicity, but it almost feels like it's like game on Asian Americans. Does it feel like there's a double standard right there?
If there is a double standard, I don't think it's intentional. I think it's a byproduct of culture. But I think it tends to stand out more given the prominence of certain figures who just happen to be Asian and happen to be in the arts and entertainment. Sometimes they're conservative, sometimes they're not. But it's also something that it's just something interesting to monitor and to look at because of the circumstances that surround it.
Yeah, it's just, obviously we've seen a lot of instances of that. Dean Cain gets a lot of guff. Obviously, we just saw the recent issues that Jae Lee has gone through. I know you experienced it yourself. I remember, I think there was supposedly legitimate articles out there claiming that you're a white supremacist. I mean, I've seen you before.
I'm not white.
Just looking at you, I can go, well, he's not a white supremacist. He's not white.
Yeah. For people who are only looking at the bunny avatar, it might be white, but I am not. I am definitely Asian. And the Mary Sue and Vice and I think Salon, they said that I was a white supremacist. And this was back in 2017, 2018. It was kind of like the start of Trump derangement syndrome. And back then, there was only one group that was making, I guess, political books that were more favorable towards the president. And I was one of them, if not the first. According to Brett Smith, I was the first who did it and come up with it and to work with him and Mark Pellegrini in terms of getting these books out there. But I don't know if it was like an oversight in terms of they didn't even bother looking at the last name to even verify it. So it was just basically them trying to get an article out as fast as possible. I've also seen arguments where they will argue tooth and nail that Asians can be white supremacists. I mean, I even saw an article put out the other day saying that Asians are white people. I mean, I don't know by what metric they're going by, but I think that also plays a hand in terms of the cultural factors that make it so that it seems like Asians are targeted more often than not. Part of it is that if you look from a socioeconomic viewpoint, besides whites in America, the two largest wage earners tend to be Asians and Jewish people. Now, Jewish people, obviously, whenever there's an attack leveled at them, we have a term for it, which is anti-Semitism. When it comes to targeting Asians, it tends to be a little bit less talked about. I think anti-Asianism doesn't roll off the tongue, and it's not as pertinent and not as wildly reported as other populations. You have very specific, I guess, fad terms when dealing with, say, trans people. You have the term transphobia. You have Islamophobia. You have homophobia. Again, you have anti-Semitism. The whole notion of anti-Asianism, it doesn't stick. I mean, I think they tried it earlier this year with regards to COVID, how they were like, well, there's a lot of discrimination happening because the president called it the China virus, and that's going to lead to a rise of anti-Asianism. We didn't really see that. It was just like a non-thing. It happened for maybe a week or two, kind of sputtered out. You didn't see Asians up in arms about it. So it tends not to be a rallying point. But I think that from a cultural perspective, because Asians are such high in terms of wage earners, you're going to have, even in entertainment, you're going to have some high profile Asians working on things. Now, as far as how much money they make is a completely different thing. But it was eventual that you have a high profile guy like Jae Lee. And because of who he's working for, he's going to get targeted because they go after the large targets. They don't go after the small ones. So inevitably, you're going to run into someone who's of Asian descent in the crosshairs of cancel culture.
So you think it probably has more to do with their success or their profile in whatever industry they're working on more than the race that they are?
Yes and no. So I don't want to put motive into someone's mind that does not exist. So I use racism I use it very rarely as a means of operation, simply because I don't want to impugn people. I think that's a very strong accusation to make. However, I think that there's two factors that play a role into why someone is targeted. Status, so how prevalent they are. And obviously, let's take Jae Lee for example. He's been around for a very long time. He's a very good artist. Whether you like his art or not, it's inarguable that he has had a very, very strong presence in the industry. So he sticks out. And then two, I think, is the timidity of the person who you're attacking. Are they an easy target or not? If you take Jae Lee and Dean Cain, for example, like Dean Cain has been kind of out of the public spotlight for years. He mostly just kind of sticks to his own. He's not doing like a lot of high profile work. People love him, that's for sure. But it's the idea that they can punch down. For a guy like Jae Lee, who through Tom King's own admission has virtually no social media presence, he's a guy that I think just came across as a natural, easy target based on his timidity. And I've noticed this a lot with a lot of these, with a lot of Asian creators who have been targeted. You have like the Dunn brothers a few years ago with Antarctic Press. From, I guess, both sides, they got a lot of flack. And I've met the Dunn brothers. They're very, very good people, very nice. They kind of stick to themselves. They don't create a ruckus or anything like that. So it became kind of easy to be like, go after them, get the pitchforks out because they were wrong because they wronged this guy. Oh, and then they were wrong because they wronged this guy. It's one of those things where it's like a lose-lose situation because, they basically just kind of want to be left alone. And so I think that these factors really play a role into it. It's much harder to punch up when you're looking at like a major status figure and trying to take them down. You're going to have a little bit of a harder time doing that.
Kind of makes me think of what happened to Peter Simeti.
Right.
Now, essentially, every comic publisher in the industry probably has a social media policy. Certainly Marvel and DC do. I imagine maybe Image doesn't because they have a weird kind of agreement with their creators. They probably do for their executives and people that are actually employees. But I imagine basically everybody has a social media policy. He has one of the smallest publishers in the industry. Now it's quite beloved. There are a lot of fans of Alterna, and a lot of people are gravitate, to the stories that he produces. But he just, admitted that he had a social media policy. He has that nice guy air to him where he never really picking sides. He was just kind of like, I love my fans. I love anyone that loves comics. I want this to be a wonderful medium for everybody, that they just thought he would be the easy target. And they just kind of eviscerated him.
Yeah, and that's one of those instances too where it was like he wasn't that big, but I think it was what he represented as far as his company is concerned. I mean, they were very professional. They were gaining momentum in terms of what YouTubers were talking about. So it was also the idea that you had to stop the star from rising too quickly. And I think
he wasn't representing talking down to fans or condemning fans for what they believe. He just thanked fans for buying his comic books. And he said, I choose not to care what else they do on social media. I'm going to say thank you for buying comic books.
Right. And for that, for I guess, challenging a known paradigm, he had to be, I guess, put to heel because of that. And like you said, because of his kind of nice guy persona, it just made it for, I guess, a much easier target as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, I just don't think anyone ever even apologized or even acknowledged that they did anything wrong with what they did, and just the hell that they put him through. Just this heartbreaking stuff when you see what happened to Jae Lee, what happened to Peter Simeti, but it happens a lot. And what happened to you, although you stand up for yourself a little bit more. You are a nice guy on social media, and I don't ever really see you going out there and picking fights. But if people go out there and publicly try and besmirch your name or say bad things about you, you tend to stand up for yourself a bit more. But
right. And there have been several YouTubers who have big social media presences who have been going after me for 2 years. Ironically, they're not even on the left. And it's like, why don't you do anything, Tim? Why don't you say anything? Well, I come from the medical field, and there's a degree of ethical behavior that you have to adhere to. And it's a question of what is it that you're going to sacrifice by doing this? Do you want this kind of perpetual back and forth of mudslinging and not? I have always believed that the quality and the quantity of the work that you produce is what will speak to your character. And I just thought to myself, and I told this to my co-creator, Mark Pellegrini, I was like, let's just, as long as we're putting the work out, people can say whatever they want about me. They can make assumptions about me, but they can't argue against my work ethic. And I've noticed that over the last 2 years, it's been very, very effective. I noticed that a lot more people, if not the majority of them, are like, man, that Tim guy was onto something. Like, he was right. And so these other YouTubers, they can talk about me all day if they want. That's fine. But there's certain things they can't call me anymore, where it's like, oh, he's a grifter, he's a con artist. Like, really? Because I'm the one who's produced more than almost 400 pages in terms of my body of work over the last 2 years. So I'm actually getting the lead out. So I think that speaks more to my character in terms of what I want to do more than anything else. And I do get that a lot, where it's like, oh, he's just kind of timid. He's not really saying anything. It's like, well, a lot of that is probably cultural as well. I was kind of raised to be that way, but a lot of it's also in the field that I am in, which is also kind of cultural, because you look at a lot of Asians in the medical field. So it's this idea of, we learn from these environments that we're in, we adapt to them. And I think sometimes the people who don't like us, they adapt to us as well. And I don't think that they're looking necessarily at race, but I think the factors put together make it so that we can be easier targets when it comes to this type of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up kind of culture and upbringing. I don't know if all the viewers know this, or even if you want me to talk about it, but both of your parents are from the Philippines, where I live now. Obviously, I live with my Filipino family, and I see a lot of the culture here. I believe your father was Chinese, your mother was Filipino, but
so my parents are both Chinese, but they lived in the Philippines. They did not know each other. They met in Texas. So they both immigrated in the 70s, and then they met here. They got married, and then obviously they had me, they had my brother, but they're culturally from there. And it's funny that you mentioned it, because the Filipinos, they're typically actually fighters. Like, they tend to be a little bit more, not aggressive, but they definitely stand up for themselves.
There's some tempers there, but it kind of makes more sense. Like you said, both of your parents originally from China, were living in the Philippines, met here in Texas. So you weren't like, even though you weren't raised in like a poor household, but your parents didn't want you to think that you were affluent. So they made you live with humble beginnings as a young man.
Yeah, they did. I grew up thinking we were poor. And it wasn't until later that, someone had asked, well, what is it that your dad does? And I said, oh, he's a doctor. And they're like, you're not poor. Now, on the other hand, I don't think we were rich either, because obviously you have things like student loans to pay off. Our house was very, very meager in terms of its size. The neighborhood that we lived in, it was kind of like an Americana, I guess, picturesque kind of neighborhood, but it was not a gated community or anything like that. But it was just the idea that Shakespeare said that you have to feign a virtue if you have it not. But it was the idea that you should always act humble when you're presented with any type of blessing. And I think that one thing that's not part of my personality is to be braggadocious or anything of that nature. And I definitely, even though I will stand up for myself, I'm also not a fighter. Like, I pick and choose battles that I think I can win. And I try to just avoid conflict as much as possible. Sometimes it's not helpful. Sometimes it can really definitely be a stain in terms of how people perceive you. But I've always been convinced that if you just stick to what you know is true and you pursue truth, I feel like that wins out at the end. And it's kind of like the statement that Jae Lee put out. I mean, I don't see how it could have been worded any better. I don't think he was trying to present himself as a victim. He was just stating, like, look, here's what happened today, that all of this happened. It was not a fun day. And I think I have a right to say that it wasn't a fun day. And I just want people to know that what you do on social media isn't just something that you can brush off. There are repercussions to it. And I think he handled that very, very well, very, very succinctly.
So do you think, with today's climate, everything is just being ratcheted up. Everything's dialed up to, it feels like 150 right now. Everything is just kind of blown up. Do you think that we'll see more targeting like this, or people trying to take trying to disparage, Asian comic creators, entertainers, Asians in media, if they don't, kind of maybe as a group start standing up for themselves, maybe a little bit more, being a little bit more outspoken, and letting people know when they've crossed the line?
Yes and no. I think it'll ramp up for sure, but I think that the way that cancel culture is working is that it's no fun when you're on the receiving end of it. And as people start to cancel each other, even people on the right canceling people on the left, and again, I think that's kind of a different topic because we're looking at, it's kind of like the whole eye for an eye philosophy and what that amounts to. I think people are going to just realize like, hey, this is no fun for a lot of us. So I think that it's going to you're going to have a flare up for sure. And then it's going to kind of taper off where it's like, man, this really sucks. Like it turns out that there's skeletons in everyone's closet. And we just have to kind of just acknowledge that that's just the truth. Some people's skeletons are obviously a lot worse than others. And then some are just digging at anything that they can find to put dirt on someone. Asians as a coalesced group, though, I am not quite sure how I feel about that. I've always liked the fact that Asians have tended to be very mindful of their own in terms of they don't really adhere to groups. They're kind of the American independent mindset. I honestly have never identified in larger Asian groups. I identify as an American, and I've never liked it whenever there have been things that were specifically catered to Asians. And I think that's a very different way of thinking culturally. We feel like it's pandering to us. So it's kind of like, hey, let's celebrate Asian American History Month. I just found that really condescending. It's like, we don't need this. I mean, just tell me about who you thought was cool in history who just happened to be Asian. That's cool, I guess. Has no bearing on my opinion in terms of status and whatnot. But I think that it's a very different way of looking at things. Even when we were growing up, mom and dad, they basically wanted us to assimilate into being American. And I know that in other ethnic communities, that's not the case. They're raised to basically look at history with a very negative light. And I think that it's a very difficult topic to address simply because it's very sensitive to a lot of people. And so I don't know how I feel about that. I think it would have to be very, very rampant and almost like a very targeted approach for it to be something that people need to group together and have a unified stand against.
So just kind of thinking about all the stuff that happens to you, like I said, your name got just dragged through the mud, whether it be from the media, it ended up being from YouTubers, fellow creators. A lot of people took shots at you, and you kind of put your head down and you just kept creating. You said, you know what, my actions will speak louder than any of my words ever could be. You're not going to drive me out. You can't make me stop. I'm going to keep creating my comics, and I'm going to keep doing it better than most everybody else. At this point, do you even want apologies? Do you want people to go back and, you know what, Tim, I wish I hadn't done that? Or do you just want to be left alone?
I do not like apologies that are not sincere, and I don't like forced apologies. And we see this all the time in the media and with celebrities and with, just people in general, where they're people I like will even be like, hey, so-and-so, you need to apologize to me. I'm not a big fan of that. I think the only reason you do that is again, it's almost a sign of dominance. So, for example, if I tell the Mary Sue, hey, I want you to apologize, in a way, I'm being kind of tongue-in-cheek because I know it's not going to be a sincere apology. It's more of me getting them to declare that they were wrong. At this point, I really don't want an apology from anyone because I don't feel like it's sincere. I don't feel like, unless it's coming from a place of personal contrition, that they mean it. They're basically just trying to either curry favor with myself or with others, or they have other ulterior motives in mind. At this point, I just like the fact that we have gotten to a point where we're able to produce the books that we want. We seem to have a very receptive audience, and people tend to like them. And they know that they can trust us. They know that we put out books on a clockwork schedule. They know that they're complete. They know they're going to get something. I have safeguards in place to where if something happened to me, it doesn't even matter. The files exist out there. They're ready to go to print. I just have to give access to the right people to get it done, and they already know what to do. So that trustworthiness, I think, hopefully speaks to my character. I mean, I think some people might not be able to trust me on some other things, but they know that if they want a book, that they can trust me and rely on me to deliver on those.
We've been talking here for about 20 minutes now. Is there anything else that I haven't covered or that you really wanted to get off your chest before we kind of wrap this up, talking about kind of the way that right now it feels like Asians are being kind of targeted or treated, in comic books, entertainment media?
No, the only thing I can really say to your listeners is that it's just food for thought. Just from my personal standpoint, I don't like to cast racism as a means. I don't think that Tom King is looking at the next Asian that he can go after. I really do think that the two factors I mentioned play a huge role into who is looked at in terms of their status and in terms of their likelihood to fight back. And I think that is a huge, at least subconscious reason why certain people are gone after. Now, then again, you also have people who are much, much higher and much, much more verbose, who people pick fights with. I just think it's just a very interesting thing to look at and observe from a socio-cultural perspective. And like I said, I'm very hesitant to cast racism as a reason or a rationale behind it, but it is kind of disturbing. Like I said, when I see it happen, there is a part of me that does think that is a reason. But more than often than not, when I sit back and think about it, I tend to give the benefit of the doubt that it's not. But since racism is thrown around nowadays as such an easygoing term, I think I also believe that it's also fair that if you have someone who is going around saying you're a racist for X, Y, and Z, I think that in a very sarcastic and satirical way, I think it's fair game to also turn it around and be like, hey, look what you did. I think that if you're applying your own definition, I think that it's all is fair in love and war, Tim, I really appreciate you coming on, giving your perspective on this, and can't wait to have you back on the channel again. Thank you very much, Wes. I really appreciate everything that you're doing. Congratulations on the meteoric rise of your success. If you are here because you follow me but not Wes from Thinking Critical, be sure to hit the like and subscribe.
Well, thank you very much. And also, here in a few seconds, you'll be able to subscribe to the Bunderdome featuring Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini. Definitely want to do that.
Thanks, Wes. Have a good one.